Hello and welcome back to another episode of Church is Stupid.
Calm a butt.
I'm Ruth.
I'm Elijah.
And I'm sleepy.
Sleepy Sam. Aww.
3 hours of sleep.
So you're doing good?
No.
Well, that's okay
That's
because we're
3
gonna
more hours than you could have gotten. Think about it that way.
When
That's
I was your
5
age.
less than I should have gotten.
When I was your age, we never slept.
I know.
We slept uphill both ways.
In the snow?
Yeah.
Barefoot?
Barefoot.
Well, welcome back. As you can see, we've not gotten any more professional in our time away. But that's all right. So this week, we're going to be talking a little bit about the church and how they handle emotions.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, our episode is entitled Preying on Emotions.
Yeah.
I almost put praying with an A to make it a pun, but then I was afraid people would just think I didn't know how to spell, so I changed it.
Yeah, that was, yeah. Just everybody know that we were thinking about the pun, though.
Yes, I just want
It wasn't
everyone
lost
to know
on us. So.
that it is great, and I do see the missed
So
opportunity.
none of you thousands of people don't comment below that we should have said that because we knew.
We do have thousands and thousands and thousands of people who've never heard of us.
Yeah.
Can you spell the word thousand?
No, I cannot. So this one sort of came up for me because I think emotions are running really, really high right now in general for a lot of people, for a lot of reasons. I mean, we have a lot going on, since 2020, I would say.
Like
Yeah.
what?
Things weren't bad until then.
Yeah.
It was all good until 2020. No, didn't we establish in one of these podcasts it was 2016?
I don't, probably.
Oh, okay. No, it all started with
That gorilla.
Harambe? Harambe? Is that
We're not talking.
Yeah, no, we did this again. That's the long-standing internet joke, isn't it? That's
Right,
where it
Elijah?
all went
Yes,
wrong.
sure. Yeah.
Right, Elijah? YOLO. Dab.
Sam, I think you're calling me old. Is that what you're
We're
saying?
both doing that.
What? You guys are so mean.
You walk
Did you
walk
hear
into it every time.
I
Did you
do.
hear they're taking the Hoppist Isengard?
Potato.
Oh, this is a disaster.
This has gone poorly.
Oh. Speaking of emotion, all I feel right now is rage.
You haven't flipped the table yet, so you're not quite.
No.
It's
quite
not
at
seething
Jesus
yet, is
level.
it?
It's not what?
Seething yet?
No.
I don't see the seething anger
No.
yet.
Back
So,
on track.
Back
Good Lord.
to where
Good
we
Lord
were.
on high. Almighty.
Nice save. So yeah, I think I've been in enough different churches that it's safe to say that emotions play a pretty big role in spirituality. Is that fair? But there is a certain point where I think churches go a little too far and tend to take advantage of the trust that people place in them.
Yeah.
Is that a fair statement?
100%, I would say. Yeah. I think there's I don't really know, like, where I can, where to draw the line and where to define, like, what kinds of Christians do this and what don't. But I mean, it's clear to see in a lot of situations that that there's a lot of like emotional abuse in the church, and a lot of people are sort of just conditioned and taught through through teachings, and through the church that they're a part of sometimes, that like almost having and feeling any kind of emotion is like the opposite of what you're supposed to be like doing almost. And I think that we've seen a very, very, very recent and big example of that with the start of the pandemic. I think it's very easy to see a lot of people, definitely a lot of Christians, chalk up any kind of worry or general concern or desire to treat things in a manner that people to do things in a more safe way that some people don't agree with. A lot of that is just chalked up to living in fear, or if you want to go even further, to having a spirit of fear, which I think is a sort of a twisted, a twisted version of the gospel and what the gospel says about the kind of thing in order to use that to get what you want. That I think that's a pretty recent example of that a lot of people can pull from, is people talking about living in fear over valid reasons for feeling nervous or afraid of something.
Well, and I think in general, social media has made emotional appeal significantly more important than it was prior to it.
Sure.
Because everybody, it's that good thing where everybody has a voice, but that bad thing where everybody has a voice.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
the good side is obviously we want everybody to have a voice. The downside is everybody thinks that they're an expert in everything. And a lot of the appeals I see, and especially when it comes to the church, my favorite current example that's sort of silly is and it's been going on since email chains were a thing, where you get like an emailed picture of Jesus that says, if you're my real believer, you're going to share this with all of at least 10 people
Right.
or something. And if you're not, you love the devil.
That kind of stuff seems ancient now.
It does, but it still happens on Facebook.
Oh, yeah.
I still see it. Oh, the one, there was the one that was, a real believer will share this. And
Yeah, right.
that one's been really popular. And then the joke version of it with Obi-Wan Kenobi. That says the same thing.
My child will share this, and it's a picture of Obi-Wan.
Yes. And so I feel like that's just sort of perpetuated this problem by making it seem it's so easy to get validation for it, right?
Right.
So easy to find people who will agree with your emotional appeal, or who will be able to say like, oh, I totally side with you, quote unquote, because it's all about picking sides.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I really don't, shockingly, I don't like the preying on emotions. I think it's ridiculous. And I'm not a very emotional person in general, I would say. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so.
I tend to lean more towards logic in my natural function as opposed to emotions. But I really don't like when I feel like somebody's trying to like manipulate me based on how I feel.
Right.
It's like if you add a Sarah McLachlan song to something, you're immediately going to feel like you have to do something about something.
Yeah.
Sam, what about you?
On what?
Church and preying on emotions, Sam. Didn't you listen to our topic?
Yeah. About 15 minutes ago.
What? You've had this
I guess just for me it'd be like, I feel like just in general the current climate in the world is hating everybody else basically.
Yeah.
And I feel like the church isn't helping much by, like, some churches are like taking stands and others aren't, and they're like fighting about it. I know churches like in my local area by my colleges, they are all like fighting right now too.
Oh yeah. Well, and your college particularly is in the middle of Flint.
Yeah.
Which
So,
has been hit pretty hard.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And so there's a lot of high intensity emotions that would surround that. I agree. I think it's led to radicalization in a lot of senses that has continued to propagate this idea of you're either for us or against us.
There's like an industry made out of it now too, on like online and stuff, with like fake news and stuff like that, just helping propagate stuff like that.
Really?
Yeah, there's like billion-dollar companies that just spread fake news and stuff.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's reassuring.
Well, I mean,
I don't know if it's
surprising.
$1 billion.
It's
but
really, I mean, it's really not that different than just what's been happening. The way that advertisers, make money just by advertising and preying on emotions anyway, that they've been doing it for forever. But now is just such a ripe time, and like divided time for I guess, I don't know, maybe for people to just be manipulated even easier, I suppose, on either end of anything, because it's just, things are just very, very tense right now. So, and yeah, it seems there's a lot of examples, unfortunately, of churches not helping with that. If anything, you might be able to see and pull up examples of the opposite happening because of the ways that some churches have sort of reacted to the events of the past couple of years, honestly.
Well, and I think that this is really, it's easy to blame it on the past couple of years, but I think it's been building for a long time.
Oh yeah, of course.
I think that's evident in just our country in general is that that's been building for a long time. And it all comes down to, I think there's like a disconnect between what you feel and how you should respond to what you feel.
Yeah.
And churches aren't good at teaching how to differentiate, right? And I know
not all the time. Yeah.
We've talked before about how I particularly feel about Christian counseling and making sure that it's a certified counselor. And sometimes churches put themselves in positions that they shouldn't, particularly surrounding things like that. And one of those signs of sort of immaturity in counseling is this idea when you come to justify everything that you feel without acknowledging that that doesn't make your actions okay.
Yeah.
Right? So essentially, what I mean by that is it's okay. A great example, and I think I've talked about this before on this podcast, is when I was working down in Kentucky and Elijah sent me a text message. And the way the text message read was like ridiculously obnoxious. And so I got angry. I was fuming. And within like 2 minutes, he texts me and says, "Oh my gosh, I just read that. That's not what I meant." Clarifies it, and it was not mean at all. And so I had no right to be angry. But I had already worked up my anger. And so it was I just remember texting you and saying, "Okay, I understand you didn't do anything wrong, but I'm already angry, so it's just going to take me a minute to not be angry."
I 100% remember that happening, and I do not remember what it was about.
No,
but
it
was just one of those things where you could word something talking about like a reaction or something in a certain way that like was totally in support, but it was just worded in such a way where if it was read from a different point of view, it could totally come across as like, I remember it could have come across as almost like insulting or like demeaning just because of the way it was worded. And I remember halfway through it, I'm like, oh, I'm reading this again. And it could totally sound like this, which is not what I meant. And I just clarified just before she even said anything.
That's my sister. How dare you?
Sam's going to pull out the glove and slap your face with it.
Yeah.
I'm the one supposed to make her mad.
And he does.
But I'm sorry, point being...
But yeah, the point being, so a sign of, I guess it's obnoxious to say that about myself, but a sign of emotional maturity is being able to recognize that you still feel the feeling. Mm-hmm. So it's not repression, which I think churches teach a lot. Repression, but it's also not validating. Well, I'm mad, so you shouldn't have done it in the first place. You should have texted me. You. Mm-hmm. Instead, it's that introflexion. Wow, I don't know what word I was trying to go for, but it was
pretty. Inner reflection.
Probably something like that.
Introflexion. I'm gonna make that into a word.
Introspection.
Introspective. Maybe,
That's probably what I was going for, but I messed that up. Anyhow, that ability to say, okay, I'm feeling angry still, so I need to take time to make sure I'm not angry, but there also isn't necessarily a valid reason to be angry, so I need to clarify with the other person, like, hey, I'm not not actually mad at you, just need to calm down for a second. And I think a lot of times we don't see that second step happening. We see, well, I feel this way. And in an interest and a desire to be kind, we're like, okay, yeah, your feelings are valid, and that's good. But the moving past that to, okay, just because you feel this doesn't mean that it's true. Mm-hmm. That's the hard part, because that's where a lot of the work comes in, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like churches tend to err on one side or the other, either repress your feelings and be happy all the time.
Yeah.
Otherwise you're wrong. Or no, you can talk about your feelings and the whole world needs to bend to your feelings. And that just is truth.
Well, yeah. And it's interesting because it's definitely in no way is that only or even mainly specific to like the church.
No.
I think if anything, I mean, that you just described exactly what the issue or one of the many issues with just social media, and especially being introduced to social media at like younger ages, is that for the most part, like all types of conversations or lack thereof revolve around that whole concept of what you just said, which is like this idea of reacting to anything and everything in a way where you are so sure of what you know is right without ever being able to kind of like look deeper. And everything is very, very like reaction based and encouraged like in that. I think a big the prime example of that too is a very popular site that people use that of course is just ripe with political discourse. Is one of many is Twitter, and the big thing about Twitter when it first came out was how low their character limit was. Like, you can only type like 120 characters, I think.
I think so, yeah.
When it started out, and then they increased it, like doubled it or increased it a bit. But even still, the whole point of it, or at least it was, the point of it was that like you couldn't or weren't supposed to be, or it wasn't normal to make long posts about anything. And all that kind of encourages is people to just make very quick and witty and pointed like quick comments, and that's sort of just treated as like what discourse is now. It's because it's very, very easy to convey sort of like emotions very shortly like that, but it's much harder to go kind of deeper. And not that this episode is specifically about that at all, like just like political discourse or anything at all, but I mean a big part of it is social media and just the way we talk now in general, especially younger generations, but definitely not limited to, is so based on just like you said, like what you're feeling and nothing really more. And the church sometimes doesn't really do a good job of being sort of separate from that. In fact, a lot of times a lot of churches sort of like indulge in that sort of way of thinking, but in a different sort of justification, with their religion and faith.
Well, and I loved what you said about reactionary.
Yeah.
Because that's how we're taught to communicate now. And also one of the things you learn in communication classes and things like that is that a lot of communication is done non-verbally, right?
Right.
So you read body language, you read I guess verbally would be tone, things that the less contact you have with the person, the easier it is to make assumptions about what they're saying without actually understanding.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So when you remove the fact that we already miscommunicate in person, then you take away seeing them, then you take away hearing them, all you have are words on a page. And so it's so much easier to disconnect that. And all of a sudden we find a society it's switching, right? Where that's becoming more common in everyday conversation, because that's how we're taught to communicate, is these reactionary things. What's your initial response to this? And because things move so quickly, you have to respond immediately. And one of my biggest complaints as a Methodist about John Wesley, who is the founder of the United Methodist Church, is that he was really reactionary. And so sometimes when people would come out with like theological discourses, he would within like 3 days have a response. And if you would read his response, it was not well thought out. It was not really a theological response all the time. And oftentimes it was sort of like, why'd you even weigh in, buddy? You didn't really need to.
Yeah.
But now that's the way we're taught to be in everything. Taking time to respond, taking time to process emotions, taking time to deal with them is not so much a good thing anymore, right? It's almost like if you don't respond to it immediately, then by the time you have time to process it, 50 other things have happened that you needed to respond to.
I've dealt with that a little bit this semester in college.
Yeah.
Just because there's one class where, like, it was a teaching class, and they just kept talking about, like, and they would just move so fast, and I was, like, 50 points behind because I was still trying to process what they're saying. I even had a talk with my professor about it the other day, and she's like, oh, you just, like, email me later with what you wanted to say. I'm like, but that doesn't really make much sense, because then, like, it wasn't really directed towards you, it was directed towards the class.
Yeah. Well, that's not really participating in the discussion, which I'm guessing is what you were saying.
Yeah.
Well, and it's so hard too to have an opinion, like a well thought out, rather, like an
like it's the
opinion
first time I've
on
ever hearing
everything. It too. And we live in an age where information is so available. I mean, I don't even know if it can become more available. I'm sure it can, but we've been at this point now where like you just know about so many things happening around you and in your country and around the world, like all the time. Where, I mean, and you're kind of just expected to know and have a well thought out opinion on everything all the time, and to be able to share it and all the time, like expected to share it all the time and stuff too. And it can be very daunting.
And ironically, instead of making that make people be more informed, I feel like it's almost done the opposite, where it's so stressful to try to maintain everything that you just post something because you have to.
Right.
And it really is emotion driven.
Everything's it's all double edged, right?
Not that everybody, because I think there are people who have become more well informed from this. Mm-hmm. However, I feel like that's why, and again, if I tell you to your face right now, Elijah, you're stinky, and you start crying, I can see you're upset, right? Yeah. But if I type online, you're stinky, I don't see you. Like, you can do a cry react, but it's not the same. You know what I mean? Well, I know this is a silly, stupid example.
Yeah.
But
everything we're talking about can just be, the sad thing is it can be delved into everything we've said so much more.
Yeah.
Because you talk about dehumanization and how it's almost difficult sometimes to remember that people that you are talking to on the other side of a screen are other human beings who are just looking at their phone or looking at a computer screen or something. And that or bots, then you don't even know. But I mean, if they are people, then they get off eventually, and they have to go about their day and feel and think about their own things.
Yeah,
and it's almost difficult now to remember that because of
Well, I actually just I cut you off.
No, I mean it's okay.
I just saw an interaction on Facebook where it was heated and it was unkind, and the person responded and said, "Hey, like, I'm in the hospital right now with my kid, and I'm having a really hard time, and I just don't have time to have this conversation with you." And the person, again, unkindly responded with like, "Oh, you must not be that busy if you can be on Facebook," or stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it was just such a mean interaction. Like, so cold-hearted.
Yeah.
And almost that was
all of those people would never ever treat people that way in person, which isn't defending or anything like those kind of actions. If anything, it's the opposite. It's just so easy to.
It's not the animosity. What's the word? Being anonymous online.
Yeah.
Anonymity.
Anonymity. There you go.
That's a really good, easy to pronounce word, isn't it?
Anonymity.
Continuing. I'm not
How do you spell that? Huh?
But yeah, no, it's I think, and all of this in my head relates to preying on emotion, because I think it involves how we're trained to process our emotions, and how the church has sort of jumped on that bandwagon of being, okay, how do we be the quippiest? How do we make people feel the most attached to this place? How do we do this, that, and the other thing? And either churches have turned from social media because it's the devil and they condemn it, or they've embraced it fully and have those quippy responses to everything and do that. And I'm not even necessarily saying it's bad to be off social media or it's bad to be on social media.
As a church, you mean?
As a church.
Yeah. Because personally, I would highly recommend getting off of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get what you're saying, though, in terms of keeping a presence and stuff and connecting. Yeah.
But it's also because the church was already kind of bad at processing emotions. Now, I don't think they've really ever properly addressed how social media has changed how we process these emotions. Because, again, we've discussed many times on this podcast how we're about 20 years behind everybody else, if we're being generous. And I don't know that we've ever been particularly great at processing emotions.
Mm-hmm.
At least in modern Christianity.
And of course, like every single time we say the phrase "the church," we're painting with a very broad brush, knowingly. And of course, there's examples of any, there's diversity and examples of any kind of churches. Where I think we're mostly just talking about our experience.
Well,
right, and what we've seen in a lot of examples of like the church.
Yeah,
I
of
tend
course,
to
like anything.
Also clarify Western church,
right?
In Tennessee,
especially
because this is where the tradition I've been raised in, at least.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is very specific to, again, our own experiences. So it's hard. It is also weird though, because like from a pastoral level, I do feel like I have a voice in this because I have experience at the different levels
right
of this sort of emotional connection. And next episode we're going to get more into how those emotions are used in order to get an end result, and how churches are historically, again, not super great at that.
Hopefully we can come up with some examples that are not that as well.
And yes, I think
solutions maybe.
I think again, as we're getting near the end of this particular episode, it's important to say that the reason that this is such a hard conversation when it comes to preying on emotions and how churches treat emotions is because, again, emotion is a part of a spiritual experience. We care about one another's emotions. We get wrapped up in the emotion of praising our God. All of those things, it's interwoven into our language. And Jesus so clearly cared about the emotions of the people that he dealt with. And how do we actually incorporate emotion into a spiritual journey and into a spiritual walk? That's the tough part, because I think that's, again, all of this about society and the way that we communicate now says, I know, we live in a society, Sam, you're welcome. But it's a fine line between, and we're learning more about it. What is emotional abuse? What is not?
Yeah.
What is emotional manipulation? How do you handle those things? And the church needs to also have these conversations. And I don't know that they have yet. And that's sort of where I'm coming from on this. Any closing thoughts from either?
I think you closed, at least on my part, I think you closed that really well. I think it's perfect.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well then, tune in on Thursday for our next episode where we'll continue. We'll get into a little bit more of the history, as I said, and really discuss what it looks like to have emotions preyed on by churches. And from all of us here at Church is Stupid, I'm Ruth.
I'm Elijah.
I'm emotionless.
We hope you have a great week.